Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Strategy Week continues, and this is the highlight of my day and probably yours. I'm here with the wonder, the one and only, the miracle that is Jacqueline Novogratz. Hello, Jacqueline. How are you?
Seth, I am great. I'm so happy to be here. And I love that you have produced this incredible book. And
That's
just
not
want to
why
say,
we're here,
and
but
I just
thank
want to
you.
say congratulations. And I knew you would be so self-effacing and you would never talk about your book. I just want to say you're a miracle. And
Well,
it's wonderful. It's a great book.
thank you. My life was changed the day I met you and has been repeatedly changed over the 20 plus years we have danced together. Um, for people who are new to the party, Jacqueline is the pioneer of patient capital. We're going to talk about patient capital for a minute. And she's made a series of decisions, strategic decisions, for the last 25 years that have, to this day, aided more than 100 million of the poorest people on earth and done it with grace and with dignity and with care and with scale. And again, Jacqueline shows up and makes a ruckus, and she makes a difference, and she leaves things better than she found them. And when you engage with her work, with her stories, with her books, you realize you can do it too. And I'm so grateful to know you. And I just want to spend a few minutes bragging about you and highlighting what you do. So, first, welcome.
Well, you've just bragged about me and highlighted what we do, but so it's probably enough.
Okay, so Acumen, patient capital. What's the original idea that you started pursuing so eloquently at the beginning of this century?
Well, the original impetus was that I had worked on Wall Street and I had worked in the charitable sector, the development sector, and I had seen that markets fail to bring critical services to the poor, and that governments and top-down charitable approaches too often see the poor as passive recipients
Mm-hmm.
and therefore create dependency. And so patient capital was trying to overcome both of these failures and recognize that we needed money to make change, but it couldn't be structured in the traditional ways on either ends of the spectrum. Patient capital was philanthropy, which we would invest in intrepid entrepreneurs looking to solve big problems of poverty. We would invest in them for 10 to 20 years so that they could try things, experiment, fail, learn, repeat. Any money that we would get back would be reinvested in other innovation to solve problems of poverty. And we had made a commitment early on to measure what mattered and not just what you could count.
Exactly. So, to put it in the language we've been talking about this week, there is a system. The market system made many people on earth rich. The market is pretty good at solving problems for people who are well off. You can go to almost any city in the world and get yourself a cup of coffee. That's a miracle. There's no one in charge of getting you a cup of coffee, and yet there is coffee. And on the other side of this spectrum was the endless emergency of poverty. And we're going to talk about the difference between an emergency and urgency. The endless emergency of poverty is there's some people over there who are going to starve to death. Let's throw a bag of rice at them. And
And it
people who are
doesn't matter if they eat corn,
right,
we have rice.
exactly. And it doesn't matter if we're delivering it with dignity and we're delivering it with care. And so the thought is that what we can do is create the conditions for people who don't have a lot of traditional resources in terms of money to engage in the market to solve their problems. Because the people who are solving their problems have to listen. Because if people don't buy your solar lantern or don't buy your clean water or don't take advantage of the facilities you're offering, you need to make it better. And they are the customer, they are not the victim. Did
Two
I
things you
capture
just said
some of that? Yeah.
that are so powerful, Seth. One is that markets are incredible systems, And that's where we start, because the market is the most powerful listening device that you have. It also isn't enough. And that is where patient capital started. And the second thing that you said is if you can make markets work. And that, I think, is something that Acumen has really learned what to do, is make markets work for people who've been undervalued, underestimated for too long.
Right. Exactly. So this insight then needs to turn into something that changes the lives of 100 million people. To do that, there are decisions to be made, and it's easy to mistake patience for just waiting. So how do we balance patience and urgency?
Thank you. Seth, you're rarely ever off on
Uh-oh.
anything, but we have actually reached 650 million people.
Wow.
Which was a number, when we hit 500 million, I thought the numbers have to be wrong, but with Acumen, we
Right.
are very focused on metrics and numbers, and it's a number that we can stand by proudly. I actually think it's still underestimated.
Thank you for correcting me.
Well, it's an important number because it shows the power of patient capital. But your question was around patience and urgency, which I do think is so critical to some of the ideas you have in your book on strategy. One of the best examples I can give of patience and urgency and holding these two ideas in tension would be what you had referenced before. Solar lighting, electrification. Back in 2007, the world had 1.5 billion people who had no access to electricity.
So wait, I'm going to stop you there, because here we are in the Northern Hemisphere. Tonight at 5:30, it's going to be dark. What it means to have no electricity, leaving out tools and things, is from 5:30 tonight until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, I wouldn't be able to see across the room. I would need a kerosene lantern with all the danger it brings just to be able to see inside where I lived. I've been to places that have no electricity. It's stunning to engage with that. And you're saying how many people had no electricity?
1.5 billion.
Extraordinary.
And so the urgency to solve that shows up in two co-eds, one of whom had lived in a village and knew how scary it was to leave your hut to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night when you couldn't see anything, and had seen his neighbor's hut burn down because what they did have was kerosene. Think about the old lanterns that, when tipped over, burned down the house, and in this case, almost killed their eldest child. That was the moment of deep urgency from this young man, Sam Goldman, and his partner, Ned Tozin, to say, we want to eradicate kerosene. Now, how does one individual or two individuals take on a system that works for everyone? It works for the mafias that control kerosene. It works for the poor because they can pay daily, 50 cents a day. If they get light, and if they don't have money that day, they'll go without light. And so you have to take on a lot. That's where the patience comes in. We invested in them knowing it was going to be a long journey, that they would have to make a lot of mistakes because they were building a market that had never existed for people who too often didn't count in terms of the way the world saw them. And so they had to figure out, how do you price it? How do you market it? When people don't trust newfangled things coming in, they've seen them come and go. How do you distribute it? Importantly, how do you finance it? And so piece by piece by piece, they started to understand lots of failures, lots of roads that went nowhere. And long story short, they've now reached 180 million people with off-grid light and electricity, with a whole suite of products that include televisions and cell phone chargers and radios and fans, and I could go on. We then continued to invest our patient capital in 40 other companies because, and you talk about this so beautifully in your book, we went from empathy, we looked at the games and who the players were, and then we started to understand the system that not only was there that had to be battled, but the system that needed to be built on top of it. And today, in total, our companies have reached 300 million people with off-grid light and electricity. And that has given us both the courage as well as the competence to be able to put together another $250 million facility to take on what is the audacious but highly achievable goal of reaching another, essentially going after the 250 million poorest households in the world who live in the 16 most vulnerable African countries. And to tell the world that there's still 800 million people with no access to light and electricity. That's unproductive, destructive, and immoral. And it is eminently solvable. But to your question, Seth, it is the need for urgency and patience in building systems where we have historically experienced brokenness.
Yeah. And so the urgency sometimes feels like recklessness, but it's not.
No.
That what we're talking about is planting seeds, watering them, fertilizing them, and having the patience to wait until harvest, but finding the right territory to plant the seeds and being realizing that not every seed we plant is going to grow, that there are investments that every investor makes that don't work or that take too long to work. But if you need to wait for it to be perfect and approved, then it's not going to happen. So part of the magic of Acumen is that you can see systems, but then build on top of those systems things that are more just and equitable and offer people control and dignity. So if we think about solar lanterns, at the beginning, solar lantern is just this little things like a flashlight. But once someone trusts that it's going to do what it's supposed to do, what it said it was going to do, now that person, because they've been able to increase their productivity, has the resources to buy a phone charger that uses similar technology. Once they have a phone, that gives them more resources, more assets, more ability to connect and to be productive, and the cycle continues. So I've been in the room when you have seen these things happen and people have told you that you can't change the system. And I have seen you say, no, we could plant this seed. The same way someone planted a seed here a couple hundred years ago, there are seeds to be planted if we can create the conditions for them to grow.
That's right. And ultimately, for all of us to realize that we can change the system because we are the system. These systems are created by human beings.
Correct.
They will be changed by human beings.
You're not sitting in traffic, you are traffic.
We are the traffic.
Right.
And what, having invested in nearly 200 entrepreneurs and supported now nearly 1,800 Acumen Fellows through Acumen Academy, has taught me is how it starts with one individual. That individual has to understand systems, but you can't understand a system if you haven't built it. And so you just start with what you have and whatever knowledge you have at that moment, and you take a step and you learn both from the fall and from the success. And then you take another step. And I have now seen this play out in such spectacular ways that at age 63, I now feel the same sort of charged up energy that I had when I was first starting out and truly knew nothing at age 25. because I know how possible change is.
Exactly. So, a couple things I want to highlight, and then I got a little bit of a question. This is the origin story. This book uh, is magic. It's called The Blue Sweater. That's a link that will get you to all the stores that sell it. The story of the blue sweater is profound. And it's profound because I think it helps us realize that while the media and other forces would like us to feel separate and disconnected, we are not. So, do you mind sharing one more time the short version of the story of the blue sweater?
Seth Godin. Sure. So,
I'll tell it if you want. I tell it as well as you.
you want to tell it?
No.
So, and you actually were the person who early on taught me how to tell it short, because I can tell it long. But essentially, 10-year-old kid, I'm given a sweater from my uncle that ironically has scenes of Africa across it. And I loved it and wore it through my freshman year of high school when a boy said a humiliating comment. Mortified, I took the sweater home and told my mother I never wanted to see it again. And we ceremoniously dumped it into the Goodwill. Fast forward 10 years after I had worked on Wall Street and was now starting the first microfinance bank in Rwanda. Running through the hills, I see a 10-year-old boy, 10 meters in front of me, and he's wearing my sweater. And I don't quite know what to do. But I know it's my sweater because it's so distinctive. I run up to the kid, I grab him by the collar, I turn it, and there's my name inked on the tag of that sweater. And that story I've held since that moment truly as recognition, not only of our interconnectedness, but how our action and inaction can impact people we might never know around the world.
That's beautiful. We're going to talk about the second book in a second, but I got a comment here from our friend Kristen. And the idea, so Kristen's building a new kind of nonprofit. And the question is, who funds it? How do you get started? What story do you bring them? And you've heard no more than most human beings. What's the answer to no?
When I started Acumen, the no often came with a lot of arrogance. You don't understand business. This is a really stupid idea. I don't even understand what you're telling me. Your idea is completely muddled. And there was a tiny part of me that thought they might be right. And yet, I also knew the realities that I had experienced and that their system wasn't reaching the poor, nor was the system that they did with their philanthropy reaching the poor. And so we had to try. And so while I couldn't come back to them with certainty and a story that would make them happy, what I could come back to them was determination. That I had already been doing this stuff for 15 years, that I was going to spend my life figuring this out. And at the end of the day, they were betting on me to knock my head into walls, to do what it took, and to not give up unless the idea was a fail. And I, now having invested in so many young people, I realize that when you're just starting, particularly if it's a revolutionary idea, you have no choice but to invest in the person. And it's why character is so important to me and why determination and grit. And I'd be interested in how you'd see this, Seth. But I actually think that's the most important characteristic for a true entrepreneur, whether they are in the social sector or whether they are in the private sector.
So there are two parts to what happened in the early days. One part is you were talking to some people you needed funding or amplification from, who sort of understood what you were doing, but didn't yet believe. And they were saying to you, if I could believe in this, it's the sort of thing that I could do. And it was you, your reality distortion, your magic, your energy and commitment that helped them believe, telling the truth in advance, being able to describe the future we're headed toward. There was a second category of person, and I hope I was helpful with this, who were saying to you, even if I believed in this, it's not for me, because it conflicts with who I see when I look in the mirror. It conflicts with the kind of person that I want to be. And I've been in the room with you with billionaires who have said that to you to your face without using kind words to describe why they were saying no. They just needed to defend who they were by denigrating you. To those people, you had the guts to say, thank you, goodbye. And we need to be able to find our smallest viable audience. We need to be able to forgive the people who don't want to get the joke, so we can put all of our energy into the people who do.
You were incredibly helpful in accompanying me in those years. To your point, you would say to me, you're not talking to 75% of the people in this room, Jacqueline. They're not even going to get what you're talking about, and they don't want to get it. You're talking sometimes to two people in the room, because if they get it, you got two more people.
Right.
And that was so powerful to me, because I thought, but don't they get the what we're focusing on right now isn't working? And you were like, it doesn't matter. Take the two.
Right.
And that was forever and will forever be a gift.
Well, thank you.
And that's
So I want to
you're
talk
talking to one person in the room.
exactly one person. I want to talk about the other book, because it's not just the other book. It is a profound breakthrough. And tell us the thesis behind Manifesto for a Moral Revolution.
The thesis behind the the manifesto.
Too many M's, yes.
Too many M's. The thesis behind Manifesto for a Moral Revolution is that our current systems, our old systems, are no longer working for an interdependent world, and that we need a new system of practices and principles on which to build our systems. In large part because we have depended on systems that only put profit at the center, when what we need to focus on is reimagining those systems to put our shared humanity and the earth at the center. Profit as a means, not as the end in and of itself. And if you do that, then there's a series of 12 principles for how we lead that help us navigate these tensions between the purpose that we all know we need to live from and build, and the profit that is the means to enable us to do so.
Right. We didn't invent culture to enable capitalism. We invented capitalism to support our culture. That we are the traffic. We don't have to have a lot of power to begin, but we can see the system. We can understand basic principles, and matters of principle aren't situational. They're principles, and we stick with them, particularly when it's hard. That's what makes it a principle. And over the decades, you've done that. The first day that Acumen started, you didn't raise any money at all. And over the months that followed, there was just a little bit. And there were only a few people impacted. And there was only a couple entrepreneurs. And there was only one country. And there was, and now. And it looks in the rearview mirror like you started with everything. But every project that's worth doing starts with the smallest possible grain of insight and somebody with the grit to make it happen.
And the most meaningful ones are hard.
Yeah.
That's just part of what the road is. And that's something you also said to me when I said, am I just setting up all of these young people for the difficult? And you said, yeah. And the difficult is the most meaningful.
Exactly.
The other thing that you're making me think, Seth, is when you start out and you know what you want to see, and it's connected to the manifesto, you don't fully understand it until you've actually experienced it, lived it, built it. And so we would say we need a system where our employees are seen not as inputs, but as participants. And that's obvious. But when you invest in two guys who want to take on the completely broken Ethiopian chicken market, and one of them has never held a live chicken in their lives, and you've seen them grow that company to this past year where they have sold 48 million chickens to 4.5 million farmers who sold 5 billion eggs. You see what's possible. But the story that we often don't tell is what I just got to experience in seeing Dr. Faseha, who was a 23-year-old Ethiopian when I first met him at the beginning of the company, now in Ghana, building out operations with 150 Ghanaian employees that he is in charge of with his subsidiary, which is part of a larger holding company. And you think, if you treat workers not as inputs, but as participants, and you give them opportunity, they will become the next wave of innovators, builders, and they will unlock the energies of others. And so these sound like words to move from consumer to citizen, from input to participant. But this is what drives our culture. This is what drives who do we want to be in this very short time that we have on Earth. And how do we want to make it real? Because it's so possible to do.
Now, not later. We have to begin, and we have to begin now. This is beautiful. You're a wonder. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Seth.
Keep making this ruckus. Appreciate you.
I adore you.